Imagine getting a phone call that stops your heart. You are the most feared man in the city. You control the streets, the banks, and the bullets. But then your phone rings. It's the housekeeper. She's screaming. She says, "Sir, please come home. She's going to destroy her." You assume your wife, that quiet, fragile girl you married for business, is the victim. You assume she's being hurt. You rush home, kick down the door, and expect to see a tragedy. But what you see isn't a victim. It's a revelation, and it terrifies you more than any gun ever could. This is the story of the day the Mafia boss realized he didn't marry a lamb. He married a wolf. The rain in New York City didn't wash away the sins. It just made the pavement slicker for the getaway cars. Cillian Sterling sat in the back of the VIP section at the Obsidian, a private cigar lounge on West 14th Street that didn't appear on Google Maps. The air smelled of aged mahogany cohiba smoke and the metallic tang of fear coming from the man sitting across from him. Cillian was 32, built like a linebacker, in a bespoke Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's college tuition. He had eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic Ocean, cold, indifferent, and currently bored. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, 11:42 p.m. "I swear to you, Mr. Sterling," the man across from him stammered. It was Arthur Penhaligon, a mid-level accountant who had skimmed 40 grand off the top of Cillian's shipping logistics in New Jersey. It was a mistake, a clerical error. Cillian didn't speak. He just tapped his index finger on the crystal tumbler of scotch. The rhythmic clink, clink, clink was the only sound in the room, besides the muffled bass of the club downstairs. "Rocco," Cillian said softly. Rocco, a man the size of a vending machine with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, stepped out of the shadows. He placed a heavy hand on Penhaligon's shoulder. The accountant flinched so hard he nearly knocked over the table. "A clerical error is forgetting to carry the one Arthur." Cillian said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the table. "Wiring $40,000 to an offshore account in the Caymans is a choice. You made a choice. Now I have to make one. Teruar soktas." Cillian reached for his glass, prepared to give the signal that would end Arthur's career, and possibly his ability to walk when his jacket pocket buzzed. He frowned. Nobody called the private line. That number was restricted to 3 people, his second-in-command, who was standing right there, his lawyer and the landline at the Sterling estate in Tribeca. He pulled the phone out. Penthouse. Landline. Cillian's gut tightened. He ignored Arthur. He swiped right. "What?" he answered, his tone sharp. "Mr. Sterling. Oh God, Mr. Sterling." It was Greta, the head housekeeper. Greta was a 60-year-old German woman who had once stared down a burglar with a cast-iron skillet. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. But right now she was hyperventilating. "Greta, calm down. What happened?" Cillian stood up. The sudden movement made Rocco reach for his holster. "You have to come home." Greta sobbed, the sound distorted by static. "She's here. Isabella is here." Cillian's blood ran cold. Isabella Rossi, the daughter of the Rossi crime family. Cillian's ex-fiancée, a woman who carried a grudge like a loaded weapon. She had been threatening Cillian for months, since he broke off their alliance to marry Serafina. "Is she hurt?" Cillian demanded, striding toward the exit. "Did Isabella hurt Serafina?" No, sir. You don't understand." Greta shrieked, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail that made Cillian's skin crawl. "There's blood. There is so much glass. I tried to stop it, but the door is locked from the inside." "Is Serafina alive?" Cillian roared, pushing past a bouncer who scrambled to open the door for him. "She's..." She's going to destroy her, sir. Please, hurry. If you don't get here, there will be nothing left." The line went dead. Cillian stared at the phone for a fraction of a second, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Serafina. He thought of his wife, Serafina Laurent, 22 years old, the daughter of a bankrupt French aristocrat who owed Cillian millions. Cillian had taken her as payment, a marriage of convenience to secure European shipping routes. She was quiet, delicate. She spent her days reading in the library and painting watercolors of the Hudson River. She flinched when he raised his voice. She was soft, and Isabella Rossi was a psychopath who had once stabbed a man in the hand with a fork because he took her parking spot. "Rocco," Cillian barked, sprinting into the rain. "The car! Now!" "Boss, what about the accountant?" "Forget him." Cillian threw himself into the driver's seat of the Aston Martin DBS, not waiting for the driver. "If my wife is dead, Penhaligon is the least of anyone's problems." The engine roared to life, a feral growl that echoed the rage building in Cillian's chest. He peeled out onto the wet asphalt of 14th Street, drifting sideways before correcting the wheel and gunning it toward the FDR drive. Please, he thought, a word he hadn't used in prayer since he was a child. Please let her be alive. I never told her. He had never told her that the marriage wasn't just business anymore. He hadn't told her that her shyness didn't annoy him. It soothed him. He hadn't told her that he watched her on the security cameras sometimes, just to make sure she was safe. He drove like a madman, weaving through the late-night traffic, running 3 red lights. If Isabella had touched a hair on Serafina's head, Cillian wouldn't just start a war with the Rossi family. He would burn the entire city to the ground and dance on the ashes. "She'll destroy her," Greta had said. Cillian gripped the leather steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Hold on, Sarah. Just hold on." The elevator to the penthouse seemed to take an eternity. Every ding of the passing floors felt like a countdown to a funeral. Ding! 40. Ding! 41. Cillian checked his gun, a Glock 19 chambered and ready. Beside him, Rocco racked the slide on his own weapon. They were ready for a breach. They were ready for a hostage situation. The doors slid open to the private foyer of the Sterling penthouse. Silence. That was the first thing Cillian noticed. It wasn't the screaming chaos Greta had described. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. "Clear left," Rocco whispered, moving tactically toward the kitchen. Cillian moved straight for the drawing room, the only room with a lock heavy enough to keep Greta out. The double mahogany doors were closed. On the floor in front of the doors, Greta was sitting on the marble tiles, weeping into her apron. She looked up, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, trembling. It stopped. The screaming stopped. Cillian felt an icy dread settle in his stomach. "Stay here." He approached the door. He didn't knock. He raised his leg and kicked the lock mechanism with the flat of his boot. The wood splintered with a deafening crack, and the doors swung inward. Cillian raised his weapon, sweeping the room instantly. "Isabella, if you—" The words died in his throat. He lowered the gun. His jaw actually went slack. The room was destroyed. That part Greta had gotten right. A jagged hole had been smashed through the antique Venetian mirror. The coffee table was overturned. A vase of white lilies lay shattered the water, soaking into the Persian rug, mixing with droplets of blood. But the tableau in the center of the room was what froze Cillian in place. Isabella Rossi, the feared Mafia princess, the woman who terrified grown men, was not standing over a victim. She was on her knees. Isabella's designer dress was torn at the shoulder. Her mascara was running down her face in streaks of black tears. She was shaking her hands, raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender, and standing over her was Serafina. Cillian's fragile wife was barefoot. She wore a simple white silk nightgown that looked almost ghostly in the dim light. Her blonde hair, usually pinned up perfectly, cascaded down her back in wild waves. In her right hand, Serafina held a shard of the broken mirror. It was 6 inches long and razor sharp. She wasn't holding it defensively. She was holding it with the casual, terrifying comfort of a surgeon holding a scalpel. She held the glass tip exactly 1 inch from Isabella's left eye. Sarah. Cillian breathed, stepping over the threshold. Serafina didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on Isabella. Her expression wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was a cold, absolute emptiness that Cillian had only seen in the mirror. "Say it again," Serafina whispered. Her voice was steady. Velvet wrapped around steel. "Say what you said about my mother." I didn't mean it," Isabella sobbed, pressing herself back against the overturned sofa. "Please, I'm sorry. Look, Cillian is here. Cillian, get her away from me. She's crazy." Serafina tilted her head. She pressed the glass closer. A tiny bead of blood appeared on Isabella's cheekbone. "He's not here for you, Isabella. No one is here for you. You broke into my home. You threatened my life. According to the castle doctrine of New York State, I can do whatever I want to you right now." Isabella whimpered, closing her eyes. "Sarah," Cillian said, his voice firmer this time. He holstered his gun and walked slowly into the room, holding his hands up to show he wasn't a threat. "Serafina, look at me." Slowly, agonizingly, Serafina turned her head. When her blue eyes met Cillian's, the mask slipped. For a second, he saw the exhaustion, the fear she had suppressed to survive the last 20 minutes. But just as quickly, the wall went back up. "She broke the vase you gave me," Serafina said. Her tone was conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. "The Ming vase. She threw it at my head." Cillian looked at Isabella, who was currently trembling like a leaf. "Is that true?" "She's a monster," Isabella screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Serafina. "I came here to talk. I just wanted to talk." She locked the door and she turned into this. "You came here with a knife," Serafina corrected her. She gestured with her chin to a switchblade lying on the floor near the fireplace. "You told me you were going to carve your initials into my face so Cillian wouldn't want to look at me anymore." Serafina stepped back, finally lowering the glass shard. She looked down at Isabella with profound pity. "You don't understand men like him, Isabella. You think scars would make him leave. He's covered in them. He understands them." Serafina dropped the glass. It hit the rug with a dull thud. "Get her out of my house," Serafina said to Cillian, turning her back on them to walk toward the wet bar. "And tell her father that if she steps foot in Tribeca again, I won't wait for you to come home next time." Cillian stood there, stunned. Rocco appeared in the doorway, his mouth hanging slightly open as he took in the scene. Isabella scrambled to her feet, clutching her torn dress. She looked at Cillian, expecting sympathy, expecting him to be horrified by his wife's violence. Instead, Cillian felt a dark, twisted pride bloom in his chest. He grabbed Isabella by the arm, not gently. "You heard Mrs. Sterling?" Cillian growled, dragging the sobbing woman toward Rocco. "Rocco, escort Miss Rossi to the street. If she resists, throw her out the service entrance." "You're making a mistake," Isabella screeched as Rocco hauled her away. "She's not who you think she is. She's not human." The door clicked shut. Silence returned to the room. Cillian stood alone with his wife. Serafina was pouring herself a glass of water. Her hand was shaking now. The adrenaline was fading. Cillian walked across the room, the crunch of glass under his boots the only sound. He stopped behind her. He could smell her perfume lavender and rain mixed with the metallic scent of adrenaline. "Syrah," he said low. She gripped the counter, her knuckles white. "I didn't want you to see that." "See what?" "The part of me that isn't nice." She turned around, refusing to meet his eyes. "My father. He taught me things before he lost his money. He said the world eats soft things. So I learned how to be sharp." Cillian reached out his rough, calloused fingers, gently tilting her chin up until she had to look at him. He expected to feel repulsed. He expected to feel betrayed that she had hidden this side of herself for 6 months of marriage. But as he looked into her defiant, terrified eyes, all he wanted to do was fall to his knees and worship her. "You thought I wanted nice?" Cillian asked, his voice rough. He ran his thumb over her bottom lip. "Sarah, I deal with nice people all day, who smile while they stab me in the back. I don't need nice." He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. "I need someone who can hold the knife," he whispered against her ear. "And tonight, for the first time, I think I finally met my wife." Serafina let out a shuddering breath, and for the first time since he walked in, she let herself be held. But Cillian knew, as he wrapped his arms around her, that the dynamic had shifted forever. He hadn't saved her. She had saved herself, and God help anyone who tried to touch her now. The adrenaline crash was always worse than the high. An hour had passed since Rocco had dragged a screaming Isabella out of the penthouse. The broken glass had been swept away by a silent, terrified Greta, who had then been sent to bed with a generous bonus and a strict order to forget everything she had seen. Now the penthouse was quiet again, but the air was different. Charged. Cillian sat on the edge of the master bed. The room was a cavern of dark blues and greys, devoid of warmth until tonight. Serafina sat next to him. She had showered, scrubbing the smell of fear and Isabella's cheap perfume off her skin. She wore one of his shirts, now the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Cillian held her left foot in his lap. There was a small, jagged cut on her heel, where she had stepped on a shard of the mirror. "This will sting," Cillian murmured, dipping a cotton swab into antiseptic. "I know," Serafina said. She didn't flinch when he pressed it to the wound. She just stared at his hands. Hands that had broken bones and signed death warrants, now treating a cut no bigger than a paperclip with the precision of a diamond cutter. "You lied to me," Cillian said, his voice low, devoid of anger, but heavy with curiosity. He wrapped a bandage around her foot. "I never lied, Cillian. You never asked." He finished the bandage and set her foot down gently, then looked up at her. His stormy eyes searched her face. "I did a background check on you, Serafina. 3 distinct agencies. Interpol, FBI, and my own private network. They all said the same thing, Serafina Laurent. Boarding school in Switzerland, art history major, clean record, charity work, soft." Serafina let out a dry, humorless laugh. She reached for the glass of bourbon Cillian had poured for himself and took a sip, grimacing at the burn. "My father was a lord, yes," she began, her voice distant. "But aristocrats are expensive to maintain. When the money started running out in 08, he didn't sell the chateau. He sold his skills." Cillian narrowed his eyes. "What skills?" "Intelligence, brokerage. He moved information for people who didn't want to be seen. The Russians, the cartels, sometimes your people." She turned the glass in her hand. He knew that in his world, a daughter was a liability, a weakness that enemies would exploit. So from the time I was 12, he didn't hire nannies. He hired ex-Mossad agents. He hired Krav Maga instructors. He made me memorize tax codes and ballistic trajectories instead of poetry. Cillian felt a chill go down his spine. He had married her to protect her, to own a beautiful thing that wouldn't ask questions. Instead, he had married a sleeper agent. "Why hide it?" Cillian asked. "Why play the scared little wife?" Serafina looked at him then, and her expression was incredibly vulnerable. "Because I wanted to be safe, Cillian. I thought if I was boring, if I was just the trophy wife, nobody would look at me. I've been running my whole life. I just wanted to rest." She leaned forward, placing a hand on his chest. The heat of her palm seared through his shirt. "But then I saw the way Penhaligon was skimming from you," she whispered. Cillian froze. "What did you say?" "Arthur Penhaligon." She said the name rolling off her tongue casually. "The accountant. I saw the ledgers you left on the desk last week. You were looking for a discrepancy in the shipping manifest. It wasn't the shipping costs, Cillian. He's been adjusting the currency exchange rates on the international wires by 0.04%. It's small enough to look like market fluctuation, but over 3 years he's stolen $4 million from you." Cillian stared at her. He had almost killed Penhaligon tonight for 40 grand. He hadn't realized the man was bleeding him for millions. "You read my ledgers." "I fixed them," she corrected. "I wrote the correct algorithm on the back of the page. You just haven't turned it over yet." Cillian stood up. He walked to the window looking out at the rain-slicked city of New York. His mind was racing. He was the wolf of New York. He was the predator. But he realized now that he had brought a lioness into his den, and he had been treating her like a house cat. He turned back to her. The sexual tension in the room spiked, sudden and violent. "You're dangerous," he said, walking back to the bed. "Only to your enemies," she replied, her chin lifting. Cillian climbed over her, pinning her to the mattress. He was careful not to put his full weight on her, but he needed to feel her solidity. He needed to know she was real. "Isabella is going to tell her father," Cillian warned, his face inches from hers. "Don Rossi will view this as an act of war. You humiliated his daughter. He can't let that slide. Let him come," Serafina whispered, her fingers tangling in Cillian's dark hair. "We'll be ready." "We," Cillian growled. "We," she confirmed. "I'm done painting watercolors, Cillian. If I'm going to be Mrs. Sterling, I'm going to be the queen on the board, not a pawn." Cillian kissed her then. It wasn't the polite, chaste kiss of their wedding day. It was possessive, hungry, and terrified. It was a seal on a new contract, one written in blood and gunpowder. The backlash didn't take long. 3 days later, a Sterling cargo ship docked in New Jersey was torched. No crew were killed, but the message was clear. Fire for fire. Don Giovanni Rossi was an old-school mobster. He believed in respect omerta and the sacred untouchability of family. Serafina had touched his family. "He's calling a sit-down," Rocco said, throwing a tablet onto Cillian's desk in his office at the Sterling Tower. "But he's doing it publicly. The mayor's charity gala, tonight at the Met." Cillian read the invitation on the screen. It was a power move. Rossi knew Cillian couldn't shoot him in the middle of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was neutral ground, filled with witnesses, politicians, and police commissioners. It was a stage. "He wants to publicly shame us," Cillian said, buttoning his suit jacket. "He wants me to apologize for my wife's behavior in front of the 5 families." "Is she coming?" Rocco asked, looking uneasy. "Try and stop her," Cillian muttered. 2 hours later, the limo pulled up to the steps of the Met. The paparazzi were a wall of flashing lights. The theme of the gala was Golden Age, and the attendees were dripping in gold sequins and diamonds. The door opened, and Cillian stepped out. He looked devastating in a midnight blue tuxedo. He offered his hand back into the car. When Serafina emerged, the noise of the crowd actually dropped for a split second. She wasn't wearing gold. She wasn't wearing white. She was wearing red. Blood red. The gown was backless, clinging to her curves like a second skin, with a slit that went up to her thigh. It was a declaration of war. In the language of the Mafia wives, you wore black to mourn, white to submit, and red to kill. You look, Cillian's voice trailed off as he guided her up the stairs, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Like a target, Serafina finished smiling for the cameras. Like a weapon, Cillian corrected. Stay close to me. Rocco has men at every exit, but Rossi is reckless. Inside the great hall was transformed. Champagne towers reached toward the ceiling. A string quartet played Mozart. But underneath the civility, the tension was razor-wire tight. Men in tuxedos nodded to Cillian, their eyes darting nervously to Serafina. They had heard the rumors, the maid who called the boss, the wife who held the glass. Sterling, a gravelly voice boomed. The crowd parted. Don Giovanni Rossi stood near the Temple of Dender exhibit. He was a massive man, 60 years old, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. Beside him stood Isabella. She wore sunglasses indoors, hiding the cut near her eye, and a high-necked dress to hide the bruises on her arms. When Isabella saw Serafina, she flinched physically, taking a step behind her father. Don Rossi, Cillian said, his voice cool. He didn't extend his hand. You bring her here. Rossi spat, gesturing to Serafina as if she were a piece of dirty laundry. After what she did to my flesh and blood, I brought my wife, Cillian said calmly, and if your daughter hadn't broken into my home with a knife, she wouldn't have tripped and fallen. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Tripped and fallen. The lie was blatant an insult. Rossi's face turned purple. You think you're funny, Sterling. You broke the truce. You let this outsider disrespect our ways. Rossi stepped closer, ignoring Cillian and looking directly at Serafina. You listen to me, little girl. You might fool him, but you don't fool me. You're walking on a grave. I demand retribution, a finger for a finger. The music seemed to stop. The air left the room. Rossi was demanding Serafina be maimed as payment. Cillian's hand went to his waistband, where a compact pistol was tucked into his cummerbund. But before he could draw, Serafina stepped forward. She didn't cower. She didn't look at Cillian for permission. She looked Giovanni Rossi in the eye. Don Rossi, she said, her voice clear and carrying over the silent hall. She switched seamlessly to fluent Sicilian Italian. You speak of respect, yet your daughter violated the sanctity of a man's home. That is a violation of the old laws, is it not? Rossi blinked. He hadn't expected her to speak the dialect. If you want my finger, Serafina continued, stepping closer until she was toe-to-toe with the Don. You can try to take it. But I should warn you. My father taught me that if someone reaches for you, you don't take the hand. You take the arm. She smiled. It was the same cold, terrifying smile she had given Isabella. Check your pockets, Don Rossi. Rossi frowned. He reached into his tuxedo pocket. His face went white. He pulled out his own private phone. Serafina held up a hand. In her palm was the battery to his phone. She had pickpocketed the Don of the Rossi crime family in front of 300 witnesses, and he hadn't felt a thing. You're slipping, Giovanni, she said softly, dropping the battery into his champagne glass with a plink. Maybe it's time to retire. For a second, nobody moved. The insult was so absolute, so complete, that violence seemed inevitable. Then the glass ceiling above them exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was gunfire. Men were rappelling down from the skylights of the great hall, dressed in tactical gear gas masks on their faces. "Get down," Cillian roared, tackling Serafina to the marble floor as bullets chewed up the stone where they had been standing a second ago. Chaos erupted. Screams tore through the air. The elite of New York scrambled over each other like rats in a sinking ship. "Rossi," Cillian shouted, drawing his gun. "Is this you?" Rossi was on the ground, covering Isabella. "No, I'm not insane. I don't hit the Met. It wasn't the Mafia. This was something else. A third party. Mercenaries." "Rocco," Cillian yelled into his earpiece. "Status. We're pinned down at the north exit. Boss heavy fire. They're targeting the gala attendees. It's a massacre." A canister hissed across the floor. Tear gas. "We need to move." Serafina coughed, her eyes watering. She hiked up her red dress, ripping the fabric to free her legs. She kicked off her high heels. "The service corridors," Cillian said, grabbing her hand. "Behind the Egyptian exhibit. Go!" They sprinted through the smoke. Bullets whizzed past them, shattering ancient pottery and glass display cases. Cillian fired back, dropping one of the masked men who tried to block their path. They reached the heavy service door. Locked. "Damn it!" Cillian kicked it. It didn't budge. Two mercenaries turned the corner rifles raised. Cillian shoved Serafina behind a stone sarcophagus and leaned out, firing. Bang! Bang! One man went down. The other took cover and sprayed automatic fire. Cillian jerked back, a hiss of pain escaping his teeth. "Cillian!" Serafina scrambled to him. Blood was blooming on his white shirt just above the hip, a graze but a deep one. "I'm fine," he gritted out, reloading. "I'm out of ammo after this mag. Sarah, on my signal you run. I'll draw his fire." "No," she said instantly. "Serafina, don't argue with me. I promise to protect you." "And who protects you?" she snapped. She looked around. Her eyes landed on a fire axe, encased in glass on the wall next to the emergency exit. "Cover me," she ordered. "What, cover me?" Cillian didn't have a choice. He leaned out and fired 3 rounds, forcing the mercenary to duck. Serafina sprinted. She didn't run away. She ran at the wall. She grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted below the axe and hurled it with terrifying accuracy. The heavy metal cylinder smashed into the mercenary's cover, distracting him. As the man turned his aim toward her, Cillian shot him in the chest. The man fell. Serafina didn't stop. She grabbed the dead man's rifle. She checked the chamber, ejected the magazine, checked the count and slapped it back in. The motion took less than 2 seconds. It was muscle memory. She turned to Cillian, the assault rifle looking massive in her slender hands against the ruined red dress. "Clear," she said. Cillian stared at her, clutching his bleeding side. He was in pain. They were being hunted, and the building was filling with gas. But God help him, he had never been more in love. "You handle an AR-15 better than my head of security," Cillian said, struggling to his feet. "Semantics," she said, moving to his side to support him. "Let's get out of here. I'm driving." They moved through the service tunnels, Serafina clearing the corners like a SWAT team leader. They burst out into the alleyway, where the valet parking was chaos. Rocco pulled up in the Aston Martin. The windshield cracked, but the engine running. "Boss, Mrs. Sterling," Rocco yelled. "Get in!" They dove into the back seat. The tires screeched as Rocco floored it, speeding away from the sirens and the smoke. In the back seat, the silence was heavy. Cillian slumped against the leather, his hand pressing a napkin to his wound. Serafina dropped the rifle to the floorboard and immediately turned to him, her hands pressing over his to stop the bleeding. "It's not deep," she assessed, her voice shaking slightly now that the danger was over. "It missed the kidney. You need stitches, but you'll live." Cillian looked at her. Her face was smudged with soot. Her dress was ruined. Her hair was wild. "Who attacked us?" she asked, looking at Rocco. It wasn't Rossi. No, Cillian said darkly. Rossi is old school. He uses pistols and threats. That was a hit squad, military grade. Penhaligon, Serafina whispered. Cillian looked at her. The accountant, he stole 4 million Cillian. You don't steal 4 million to buy a house in the Hamptons. You steal 4 million to buy an army. He knew you found out. He tried to wipe out the board before you could come for him. Cillian closed his eyes, his head resting against the seat. He hired a private military contractor to hit the Met just to get to me. Desperate men do desperate things, she said softly. Cillian opened his eyes and grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but intense. You could have run, he said. When we were behind the sarcophagus, you could have run. I told you, Serafina said, leaning down to kiss the corner of his mouth, tasting the copper of blood and the salt of sweat. I'm not a pawn, I'm the queen, and the queen protects the king. Cillian let out a breath that was half laugh, half groan. Remind me never to make you angry again. Good plan, she whispered, but as the car sped toward the safety of the Tribeca estate, Serafina looked out the window. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Penhaligon was just the money. He didn't have the connections to hire a hit squad like that. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who knew Serafina's past. Someone who knew that the best way to kill a wolf is to lure it out with a lamb, and she had a terrible feeling that the ghosts she had run from in Europe had finally found her in New York. The warehouse in the meatpacking district smelled of brine rust and Arthur Penhaligon's terror. Arthur the accountant, who had skimmed millions and hired a hit squad to cover his tracks, was zip-tied to a steel chair in the center of the empty floor. His Italian loafers were scuffed, his glasses were cracked, and he was weeping openly. Cillian stood in the shadows, his side bandaged under a fresh black shirt. He was smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing like a demon's eye in the dark. He hadn't touched Arthur yet. He hadn't needed to. The heavy metal door groaned open. Serafina walked in. She had changed out of the ruined red dress. She now wore a sharp, tailored black suit with stilettos that clicked rhythmically against the concrete floor. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. She looked like a CEO, but the energy radiating off her was pure executioner. She dragged a metal stool across the floor, the screeching sound making Arthur flinch violently. She placed it directly in front of him and sat down, crossing her legs. "Arthur," she said. Her voice was soft, terrifyingly polite. "You've caused my husband a great deal of pain tonight. He's very upset about his car and his favorite suit." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. Please, I'll give it back." Arthur blubbered, snot running down his nose. "I have the codes to the Cayman accounts. I'll transfer it all back. Just let me go." Serafina tilted her head. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a tablet. "We know about the money, Arthur. That's boring math. I fixed your algorithm in 10 minutes, she said, tapping the screen. What doesn't add up is the logistics. You're a mid-level accountant. You drive a leased BMW. You don't have the contacts to hire a paramilitary strike team to hit the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That kind of talent costs more than you stole." She leaned forward, her blue eyes piercing him. "Who backed you? Nobody. It was just me." Cillian stepped out of the shadows. He didn't speak. He just walked over to a table covered in tools, hammers, pliers, a blowtorch, and picked up a heavy wrench. He weighed it in his hand, looking bored. "Arthur," Cillian said, his voice graveled. "My wife is asking you a question. It would be rude not to answer." "I can't," Arthur screamed, straining against the zip ties. He'll kill my family. He said he'd burn them alive." "And what do you think we are going to do?" Serafina asked. She stood up and walked over to Cillian. She gently took the wrench from his hand. She walked back to Arthur and placed the cold steel against his cheek. "You think the man who hired you is a monster," Serafina whispered. "But you're forgetting something, Arthur. You're in the room with the Wolf of New York. And I—" She smiled, a ghost of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm the one who sharpens his teeth." Arthur looked between them, the hulking, silent violence of Cillian Sterling and the cold, calculated intelligence of Serafina. He realized then that the rumors were true. He wasn't dealing with a businessman and his trophy wife. He was dealing with a two-headed dragon. "It was the Frenchman," Arthur whispered, his head hanging low. "He contacted me 6 months ago. Said he knew I was skimming. Blackmailed me. He said he'd expose me to Cillian if I didn't help him dismantle the Sterling Empire from the inside." Serafina went rigid. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as marble. "The Frenchman," she repeated. "Did he have a name?" "Laurent," Arthur sobbed. "Henri Laurent, your father." The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. Cillian looked at Serafina. He expected her to crumble. He expected her to deny it. Henri Laurent was supposed to be a broken, bankrupt aristocrat, living in a crumbling chateau in Bordeaux. That was the story. Serafina turned away from Arthur. She walked to the far wall of the warehouse, her back to them. She placed her hands against the cold brick, breathing deeply. "Sarah," Cillian asked, stepping toward her. "He never lost the money," she said, her voice hollow. "The bankruptcy, the debts to you, it was all a play." She turned around, and her eyes were blazing with a fury that made Cillian's heart race. "My father isn't just a lord, Cillian. In the intelligence community they call him the architect. He destabilizes regimes. He collapses economies for profit. He sells chaos." She began to pace the pieces, clicking together in her mind. "He didn't sell me to you to pay a debt. He placed me here. I was a sleeper asset. He thought if he put me in your house, eventually I'd turn on you. I'd steal your codes, your network, and hand it to him. He wanted the Sterling shipping routes to move his weapons." "But you didn't," Cillian said. "No. I fell in love with you," she said simply. She stopped pacing and looked at Arthur. "He realized I had gone rogue," Serafina said. "That's why he sent the hit squad. He wasn't trying to kill you, Cillian. He was trying to kill us. He's liquidating a failed asset." "Me," Cillian looked at his wife. He saw the years of trauma, the training, the fear she had lived in. And then he saw the strength that had forged her. He walked over to her, cupping her face in his hands. "He's not an architect anymore," Cillian growled. "He's a trespasser, and nobody touches what is mine." "He's coming here," Serafina said. "Now that the hit at the Met failed, he'll come personally to clean up the mess. He's arrogant. He thinks I'm still his scared little girl. Then let's invite him in," Cillian said. He pulled his phone out. "Rocco, bring the car around. We're going home. And call the cleanup crew for Arthur. He's leaving the country tonight. If I ever see him again, I'll bury him in the foundation of the new stadium." Arthur sobbed with relief. Serafina straightened her jacket. She took the wrench from the table and dropped it into the toolbox with a clang. "One condition," she said to Cillian. "Anything." "My father," she said, her voice ice cold. "He's mine." The rain had stopped, leaving the New York skyline, glittering like a necklace of diamonds against the velvet throat of the night. The penthouse was silent. The broken glass from Isabella's visit had been replaced. The blood had been scrubbed away. The vase was gone, replaced by a single black orchid in a crystal jar. Cillian sat in the leather armchair facing the door, a glass of scotch in his hand. Serafina stood by the window looking out at the city she now helped rule. She wore white now, a white silk suit that looked like armor. The private elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Henri Laurent stepped out. He was a handsome man in his late 50s, wearing a tan trench coat over a bespoke suit. He carried a silver-tipped cane, not because he needed it, but because it was a weapon allowed on airplanes. He looked around the room with a sneer of distaste. "Americans," Henri said, his voice dripping with French disdain. "So much glass, so little taste." He looked at Cillian. "Mr. Sterling, you look surprisingly well for a man who was shot at 3 hours ago." "I heal fast," Cillian said, not rising. "And your aim is sloppy, Henri." Henri laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Good help is hard to find. Speaking of help," he turned his gaze to Serafina. "Hello, little bird," Henri said. "You've been a very naughty girl. You were supposed to report in 3 months ago, the encryption keys for the Sterling shipping lanes. Where are they?" Serafina turned slowly from the window. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down. She looked him dead in the eye. "There are no keys for you, Papa," she said. Henri's smile faltered. "Excuse me." I said, "No, I'm not your asset. I'm not your spy. I am Serafina Sterling. And this is my home." Henri's face hardened. The mask of the aristocrat slipped, revealing the cold, calculating sociopath underneath. He tapped his cane on the marble floor. "You think because you married a thug in a suit that you are safe?" Henri stepped closer. "I made you Serafina. I taught you how to walk, how to talk, how to lie. I own you. If you don't give me what I want, I will dismantle this life you've built, brick by brick. I will kill your husband. I will burn this tower down." He reached into his coat pocket. Cillian's hand twitched toward his gun, but Serafina raised a hand to stop him. "You taught me how to lie." "Yes," Serafina said, walking toward her father. "But you forgot to teach me loyalty, because you have none." Henri pulled out a pistol, a sleek, silenced Beretta. He pointed it at Cillian. "Give me the code, Serafina, or the wolf becomes a rug." "You won't shoot him," Serafina said, calmly, continuing to walk toward him. "And why is that?" Henri sneered. "Because," Serafina stopped 2 feet from the barrel of the gun. "You didn't check the tea." Henri frowned. "What?" "The tea you drank in the lobby while you waited for the elevator security clearance. The concierge, he works for me, not Cillian. Me." Henri's eyes widened. He coughed a sudden wet sound. He staggered the cane, slipping on the floor. "Digitalis," Serafina explained, her voice sounding like a lecture in a classroom. "Derived from the foxglove plant. In high doses, it causes cardiac arrest. But in the dose, I gave you paralysis. First the legs, then the hands." Henri's knees buckled. He fell to the floor, the gun clattering from his numbness fingers. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with shock. He looked up at his daughter, the fragile girl he had sold. "You," he wheezed. "You. Ungrateful." "I'm not ungrateful," Serafina said, kneeling beside him. She picked up his silver-tipped cane. "I'm grateful for the lessons, Papa. You taught me that the world eats soft things." So I became hard. She stood up, looking down at the man who had tormented her childhood, the man who had tried to kill the love of her life. "Rocco," she called out softly. Rocco stepped out from the kitchen, looking grim. "Take the trash out," Serafina ordered. "The East River should be cold tonight." "Sarah," Henri gasped, a tear leaking from his eye. "Please, Serafina looked at him, and for a moment Cillian thought she might hesitate. But then she looked at Cillian, at the bandage on his side, at the man who had given her a home, a name, and a choice. "Goodbye, Henri," she said. Rocco hoisted the paralyzed man over his shoulder like a sack of flour and carried him to the service elevator. The doors closed. Serafina stood alone in the center of the room. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Cillian stood up. He walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in her scent. "You scare me," he murmured against her skin. "Good," she whispered, leaning back into him. "Fear keeps you sharp." "You know what this means?" Cillian asked, turning her around to face him. "The Rossi family will hear about this. The 5 families will know. You took out the architect. You're not just a wife anymore, Sarah. You're a target." Serafina smiled. She reached up and adjusted his collar. "Let them come," she said. "We have the guns. We have the money. And now, we have the freedom." Cillian looked at her, really looked at her. The maid who had called him crying was gone. The fragile girl was gone. In her place was a queen crowned in blood and glass. "Greta is going to be furious about the rug," Cillian joked, glancing at where Henry had scuffed the marble. Serafina laughed, a genuine bright sound that filled the penthouse. "I'll give her a raise." Cillian kissed her. It was a kiss of promise, a promise that no matter who came for them, the Russians, the feds, or the ghosts of the past, they would face it together. The phone on the table buzzed. It was the private line. Cillian picked it up. "Sterling?" "Mr. Sterling," a shaky voice said. "It was Giovanni Rossi. I heard about the Frenchman. I just wanted to say, the Rossi family apologizes for the misunderstanding at the gala. We send our respects to Mrs. Sterling." Cillian smirked. He put the phone on speaker. "Tell him yourself," Cillian said. Serafina leaned toward the phone. "Don Rossi," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Thank you. And please tell Isabella she's welcome for tea any time. I promise to put the knives away." The line went dead. Rossi had hung up out of fear. Serafina and Cillian looked at each other and smiled. The city outside was dark, but inside they were burning bright. The maid had called the boss, but the queen had saved the king. And that is how Cillian Sterling learned the most valuable lesson of his life: never underestimate the quiet ones. Serafina wasn't a damsel in distress. She was a weapon waiting to be fired. They say behind every great man is a strong woman, but in the Sterling Empire, the woman isn't behind him. She's standing right next to him, holding the ammunition. What did you think of Serafina's transformation? Do you think she went too far with her father, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this twisty, dark Mafia romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy revenge drama coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.